right. Hi. Woo. What happened? Sorry. Yeah. So, hello to everyone watching. Thank you very much for tuning in. Today, I'm here with Kipkorir Kirui, a very talented product manager, and we get to see some amazing work that he's done in the past. So, Kirui, could you please introduce yourself?
Okay, thank you so much, Charity, for having me on this call today or this recording today. My name is Kipkorir Kirui. I usually describe myself as a product manager and a designer too at the same time. And I'll talk a bit more about why I'm at that specific intersection. I've been in the Kenyan tech ecosystem for the last since 2012. That's when I started
Wow.
working.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been in the startup space, worked in big tech, and just all over the place in one or another way. I've held a couple of roles. Started off as a software engineer, got into clients
Mm-hmm.
relations stroke project management, had an
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to run a consulting team. So that's biz dev, sales, talent acquisition and retention, and just being in charge of the P&L for a company. I was
Mm-hmm.
also a human-centered designer. At the same time, I was running that team. A bit later, I
Mm-hmm.
transitioned into product management,
Mm-hmm.
started my own company, and then now got into big tech. Yeah, so that's
Mm-hmm.
a highlight of who I am.
Interesting. You're like Thanos collecting all those little like jewels everywhere. You have a very diverse like skill set. So I'm curious to know how your background as it is like impacts your work as a PM today.
Okay, so my background is what has made me a PM, and I'll actually
Yeah.
explain it. When you talk about product management, it's an intersection of three key things. I mean, there are very many ways of defining it, but usually
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, it has a business component. So, as a
Mm-hmm.
product manager, you need to make sure whatever you're working on is sustainable or generating income for a specific company. It has
Mm-hmm.
to address a specific need in the market in a way
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense to the people that you're designing for and are able to afford it or leverage it. And then the
Mm-hmm.
last part is in the tech ecosystem, there's always a technology component. So having
Mm-hmm.
started off as a software engineer gave me the
Engineer,
foundation
yeah.
I needed technically. I
Mm-hmm.
spend a lot of time out in the field doing research, interacting with potential users and other
Mm-hmm.
stakeholders. That's the market component, just learning how to build products that people will use. And then to
Mm-hmm.
tie all this together, having been in charge of the profit and loss of a specific unit in a company, and also having run my own company, I also understood critically the importance of making sure that products you're building have a
Mm-hmm.
positive impact on the bottom line of the company or are
Mm-hmm.
sustainable. Yeah. So I feel those detours are the ones
Mm-hmm.
that made a big difference in terms of shaping how I view product management. I recently read
Mm-hmm.
a book called about why generalists thrive in this modern world, and I feel
Mm-hmm.
it's a depiction of my story. I'll share a link to the book.
Mm-hmm. I think I know the book, the one with the green cover called Range. Is that the one?
Yes, 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 yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I very much know that because I think I consider myself a generalist
General.
as well. It's like,
Okay.
especially when you're working in the startup space, like I have for some time, you like pick up a lot of different things and like essentially is the essence of who you are as either product manager or a product designer. So I think I completely resonate with your story. I think it's a really fantastic story. Maybe you could share your screen, and I know you'd prepared something for us to see on your your journey to product management.
Okay. So I've
Yeah.
basically talked about it already.
Yeah. Hmm.
If I was to give you a visual, I started off
Hmm.
as a software engineer at Pesapal,
Yeah.
uh,
Oh.
and then sort of transitioned into the freelance ecosystem as an API engineer. The reason
Hmm.
I focused on API engineering was because
Hmm.
there was limited user interaction. The
Hmm.
specifications are very clear,
Hmm.
and the outcomes are quite clear.
Hmm.
During my time as a freelance API engineer, I had the opportunity to work as a consultant for the team at iHub Consulting. And when
Hmm.
the lead, the person who used to run the team, left, I was given a 3-month contract as they were looking for
Hmm.
a placement. That 3 month contract turned into 3 years. So I
Yeah.
left iHub in
It's fantastic.
2016, took a short
Mm-hmm.
break, had an amazing opportunity to work with one of the amazing startups in
Mm-hmm.
Kenya called Eneza Education as the head of product. And Eneza provides revisional material or revisional content to primary and secondary school students on the
Mm-hmm.
devices that they have. So if you have a dumb phone, it will be SMS based or USSD based. If you have a
Mm-hmm.
smartphone, you can access it on the web or through an
Mm-hmm.
app. That particular part of my journey was relatively short, 6 months
Mm-hmm.
only, before I now transitioned into starting my own consulting company, an innovation studio called Made by People. It's still up and
Mm-hmm.
running. It's being run by
Oh,
my former business partner, and our
wonderful.
focus at that point in time was supporting entrepreneurs, individuals, corporates in the innovation journey. So we
Mm-hmm.
talked a lot about leveraging human-centered design principles to quickly and cheaply validate ideas and build new products, but at the
Mm-hmm.
same time had an agile software development team because we
Mm-hmm.
realized for quite a number of the people that we worked with, they
Mm-hmm.
couldn't really translate their findings from the design process into a product. So we also had that component. Being an innovation studio, COVID was particularly harsh on us.
Mm-hmm.
So during that period, we had to rethink how we structured the business. I
Mm-hmm.
ended up exiting, and part of the reason I left was I also wanted to focus a bit more on products. If
Mm-hmm.
you're running a team, you're a generalist, like you're doing a lot of
Mm-hmm.
sales, you're talking to
Mm-hmm.
people, whether you like it or not, you become quite rusty over time when it comes to product development. So I joined the
Mm-hmm.
team at Microsoft as a product manager, worked for
Mm-hmm.
2 years, 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I was affected by the layoffs in March
Yeah.
last year.
Mm-hmm.
And from that, I now transitioned into a product and design consultant. Yes, and I'll be
Mm-hmm.
starting a new gig in December, but
Oh,
that one is not
fantastic.
in the open yet. Yeah, so I'll not
Mm-hmm.
mention it for now.
Oh, so we got the scoop. um, that's fantastic. I was actually curious to know like how you handled like the shift from, like being the CEO and at the executive level, handling all that like higher level strategic work, and then going to becoming like an IC at Microsoft. Um, and yeah, that's a
Oh,
bit of a segue, but it's something I'm also curious about how you handled and what was different
yeah,
in
it's
the
it's
day to day.
definitely two different worlds because
Hmm.
I think the work of a CEO, a founder, someone doing sales, and that type
Yeah.
of a setup, it's
Hmm.
very interactive work. You have meetings, you
Hmm.
go and do this, you come and do this, you have this conversation, and I feel
Hmm.
for most IC work, it's a lot of
Hmm.
like high concentration, long hours of focusing on
Hmm.
maybe one or two things. There
Hmm.
is the way I handled it is along my journey, I've always
Hmm.
done a certain aspect of IC work. So even when
Hmm.
I was running my own company, I used to do a lot of the human centered design work. So mostly design workshop
Mhm,
facilitation, strategy session.
mhm,
So I hadn't really lost touch in terms of the day to day aspects of it, but it was still an adjustment. But going into it mentally, I was prepared, knowing I've come from a space where I was guiding and supporting people to execute against our goals to being
mhm,
someone doing it. So mentally, I was prepared and I leaned a lot on my manager,
mhm,
then at Microsoft, my colleagues. And
mhm.
I think within a short period of time, mentally, I
Yeah,
was in that space where I knew I'm an
yeah.
IC now
Mhm,
and my day to day is not the same as it was before. Interestingly, once I settled as an IC, my role
yeah.
was changed to a manager at
Ah,
Microsoft. But
so it's like you
for that,
went back.
yeah, but
Yeah.
in this specific case, I didn't have a
Mhm,
large team. So it was
mm,
mostly IC. I would say 80,
mm,
85% IC and 15% manager.
mhm.
Yes.
Great, that's fantastic. That's good to know because I can imagine there's a huge mindset shift that has to happen during each of these transitions. Great.
Yes.
So I think now I'm really curious to know about the project that you've prepared for us. How did you approach it, your general approach to different like processes like during discovery, what did you do? So if you could package that for us in the context of a project, for the sake of the people that are learning and how to apply these things in their day-to-day um, product work.
Okay,
Yeah.
fantastic. So I think I'll just start with introducing the approach.
Sure.
I'm a big believer in this combination. So basically, leveraging principles from the human centered design discipline and agile
Mm-hmm.
software development processes. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason is most of the times for the problems I encounter, the solution tends to have a huge digital or tech component.
Mm-hmm.
So I combine the two just to make sure that we're covering different bases. So I'll just talk
Mm-hmm.
a bit about the definition that I'm working with when I'm referring to
Okay.
human-centered design.
Mm-hmm.
Some people
Great.
call it design thinking. I avoid that
Mm-hmm.
term because it's
Why
very,
so?
very, very prescriptive. Like
Mm-hmm.
design thinking is a five-step process.
Mm-hmm.
Yet the way or the type of work that I've done for quite a while requires you to explore a bit more and fork
Mm-hmm.
a lot during the way. So I found the human-centered design definition better. It's
Mm-hmm.
essentially a creative approach to problem solving. We're always starting with people. Please
Mm-hmm.
note that we are not starting with end users, we're starting with people. The end user
People.
is a very, very critical part of it, but there are quite a number of
Mm-hmm.
other stakeholders around that particular
All
scenario.
right.
And then our end goal is innovative solutions tailored to the people that we've been working with. So we can't
Mm-hmm.
start with this group of people and then launch or ship to another group of people. We can
Mm-hmm.
pivot along the way, we can change, but at the end of
Mm-hmm.
the day, the solutions that we ship or that we work on should be
Mm-hmm.
tailored to meet the specific needs of the people that we are working with.
Mm-hmm.
Agile software development, I don't think I need to go deeply into that. Okay, nowadays, almost the traditional way we build software, where we are
Mm-hmm.
compressing it into shorter cycles,
Mm-hmm.
having more frequent check ins, and having
Yeah.
more demos, and just managing risk within shorter spans and getting feedback within shorter
Mm-hmm.
spans. Yeah, so that's the
Exactly.
general approach that I use. A
Mm-hmm.
way to visualize this, and I talked about it earlier, is it's the intersection of something that's technologically feasible,
Mm-hmm.
it's business viable, so either it's making money for the entity or it's
Mm-hmm.
sustainable, and then it's market desirable. That being, people find use in it or value in it and are able
Mm-hmm.
to use it. There are scenarios where people can find value in something, but it might be
Mm-hmm.
overpriced or not
Mm-hmm.
accessible in ways that they can leverage it. So,
Mm-hmm.
now to combine the two, because this part is
Mm-hmm.
usually a bit confusing for people, uh,
Mm-hmm.
I usually use this implementation approach. It's called the double diamond process.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
basically, it brings together the design process, or rather the human-centered
Mm-hmm.
design process, and then
Mm-hmm.
aspects of or rather the agile software development process.
Mm-hmm.
So we always start with a challenge. We always
Mm-hmm.
solving an issue at the end of the day, and we explore what that challenge is. We really, really like dig deep into it, understand the
Mm-hmm.
variations or the ways it manifests. So that's
Mm-hmm.
the discover phase. At the
Mm-hmm.
end of it, we have a very good understanding of the problem, but problems are usually very wide and we
Mm-hmm.
can't tackle them like all of them at once. So we then
Mm-hmm.
choose the one we feel we should focus on
Mm-hmm.
based on a number of factors. It could be impact, it could be speed to market, it could be cost.
Mm-hmm.
There are quite a number of ways to define that criteria. At the end
Mm-hmm.
of those first two phases, you will have a clearly defined problem. I would like to
Mm-hmm.
highlight that it's not a linear process. You might
Mm-hmm.
do the discovery, and
Yeah.
then when you try and define it, you realize that you focused on the wrong
Mm-hmm.
thing. So you go back again to
You
discovery.
need to go back. So it's
Ideally,
iterative.
within a very short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, this discover define should
Mm-hmm.
be 2 to 3 weeks maximum. And
Mm-hmm.
then now, once we have a clear problem definition, we
Mm-hmm.
go into the traditional development flow, the agile software
Mm-hmm.
development flow. I
Yeah.
personally tweak it a bit especially in the later stages where I'm introducing things like
Mm-hmm.
usability testing, early
Yeah,
interactions with customers. And
that's
then
actually a question. Mm-hmm. Sorry.
And then the last part is now that we have a solution that we've
Mm-hmm.
created, we need a good plan to deliver it, to get it to market. Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the broad implementation approach that I leverage for
Mm-hmm.
projects that I take on. Yeah.
Great. I have a question for you on, I think, still discovery. How do you ensure that you're always like, as you're working in the agile way, how do you integrate like the new learnings that you find? How do you create opportunities for you to interact with users and essentially uncover new insights for you to iterate on?
Okay. So this might sound a bit controversial, but there's a
Yeah.
point in the process where you actually have to sit down and focus on building whatever you're building. But luckily, the agile software development process gives you opportunities to do this, and this is primarily using the sprint demo. So at the end of the
Mm-hmm.
2 weeks, especially in later stages, so if we are
Mm-hmm.
running like a 3 to 4 month project, once
Mm-hmm.
we do the discover define phase, maybe in the first 2 to 3 weeks, or even let's say a month, because maybe it's
Mm-hmm.
something quite complicated, my expectation usually is for the
Mm-hmm.
first 2 to 3 sprints, we won't really
Mm-hmm.
have much user interaction because we don't have much to show. And
Yeah.
from my experience,
Mm-hmm.
when you show like like prototypes that are not really developed, like low
Mm-hmm.
fidelity to end users,
Mm-hmm.
they start co-creating with you. And I usually
Mm-hmm.
think at that stage, that's not what you're looking for. You're looking for
Mm-hmm.
reactions and feedback. So I usually
Mm-hmm.
make sure that in as much as we're being agile, we have enough time to build
Mhm,
something that we can
mhm,
now at a later stage get our users to
mhm,
give us feedback. So
mhm,
my way of doing this, one, during the demos, always have like external people.
mhm,
In cases where it's a client, have the client in it. In
mhm,
cases where you're
mhm,
working within a team, within an organization, have someone
mhm,
who's not part of it on a day-to-day basis. They will
mhm,
already give you like a perspective that is not
mhm,
ingrained in a day-to-day know-how. Because
mhm.
as an executor of a project, you intimately aware of every bit and piece of your project.
Yeah.
Then further down the
Mhm,
line, now plan usability studies that involve your
mhm,
end users who then give you feedback before you launch and then use
mhm,
that feedback to iterate or improve on it. But
mhm,
one thing also that I would like to highlight, and this
mhm,
happens a lot on all projects, as you
mhm,
execute on the project that you're working on, you will get new ideas of how to maybe tackle certain issues. You will get
mhm,
new ways of doing things.
mhm,
I incorporate that into the planning, and I
mhm,
encourage like team members where possible to explore other ways of doing something,
mhm,
and then we will
mhm,
now like adjust it to fit like our project plan. So it's important to strike that balance between
mhm,
being agile and evolving something and also
mhm.
sticking to timelines that you have in mind, because at the end
Yeah.
of the day,
Mhm.
there's something I mentioned about the value of human-centered design. You want to quickly
Yeah.
and cheaply validate ideas. So if
Mhm,
we keep iterating and improving just because we think we found new insights, we'll never ship
mhm,
something. So it's an
mhm.
interesting balance, but it's fairly
Yeah.
easy to strike it. Yes.
True. Essentially, like using your stakeholders to gut check and ensure you're making like at least strides and building in the right direction, as
Yes, but
opposed to
be very,
stalling all the
very
time, then building from scratch again and then stalling and then changing
yes.
direction. Yeah.
Yeah, but
All
be
right.
very, very careful with how you work with your stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, you don't want to be a feature factory whereby
Mm-hmm.
anytime you go to your stakeholder, they give you some feedback and
There's a
then
new
you
thing.
automatically redo certain things. You also need
Yeah.
to know, like
Mm-hmm.
broadly, this was our goal. This is
Mm-hmm.
the feedback that we are getting. Does it really
Mm-hmm.
drive us towards our goal, or is it is it a distraction that will
Mm-hmm.
now vary like the end goal? So one of the practices that I've really, really made,
Mm-hmm.
or rather made it key to my process, is when we're
Mm-hmm.
starting off, we really need a lot of clarity on our user
Mm-hmm.
goals and our business goals,
Business
the
goals, yeah.
vision and the mission of our product. And at any point where we are unsure about something, we always come back to those. So unless that has changed, if a
Mm-hmm.
new suggestion or new feedback is not
Mm-hmm.
driving us towards those goals, we don't
Yeah.
don't implement it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic point, especially for people that are working, even like the consultants like us. For example, every time you have a client meeting and then something new comes up, they have this grand idea. I think it's always good to kind of return them back to your business strategy and the objectives that you set.
Yes, yes, I
Yeah,
totally agree.
fantastic. Great.
Okay.
So I'm curious to see now how you apply this in the context of an actual like project.
Okay. So my
Yeah.
case study is a bit old,
Hmm.
but still very relevant.
Yeah. Old is
Some
good.
time back,
Yeah.
when I used to now uh, run Made by People, when we just started, we had this
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to work on a data project called Takwimu. The name
Mm-hmm.
Takwimu actually came from part of the project activities. It's
Mm-hmm.
not a name that we knew in advance. So
Mm-hmm.
the aim or the goal of this specific project was to
Mm-hmm.
promote more data-driven program design and
Mm-hmm.
implementation for a very specific group, small and medium-sized NGOs. And the reason
Mm-hmm.
we were specifically targeting this group of users or like
Mm-hmm.
stakeholders was that they have significant resource constraints.
Mm-hmm.
Data-driven decisions or data-driven
Mm-hmm.
decision making is not something
Mm-hmm.
cheap. You have to invest quite a bit to get there. So we were
Mm-hmm.
wondering, can we do something about it? The project was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and it was executed by a consortium of Africa Practice,
Mm-hmm.
Code for Africa, and our part was now through iHub Consulting,
Mm-hmm.
where we were subcontracted to execute it. The expected
Mm-hmm.
outcome was very simple. It's a
Mm-hmm.
web-based platform, and the goal was to provide analysis and
Mm-hmm.
visuals that the target users could quickly pick and use for that
Mm-hmm.
data-driven program design and implementation.
Yeah.
We did a couple of things. So as I
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, this was a project that cut across quite a number of stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
Africa Practice was focused on the policy and how things actually work, and
Mm-hmm.
doing the analysis that would give us the information on the insights that would be useful to
Mm-hmm.
the end user. Code for Africa is a specialist in data projects. The way you
Mm-hmm.
execute projects, data projects, is very different from traditional projects.
Mm-hmm.
And on our side, we were focused on the user experience and just the overall, like guiding the realization of that specific project.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll focus on the bit we did because it's quite a wide case study.
Sure.
To get to our goal as my team, we did user research.
Mm-hmm.
We facilitated a couple of workshops. We
Mm-hmm.
contributed during the development process and then
Mm-hmm.
for testing and improvement. Data collection was more on Code for Africa, or rather,
Mm-hmm.
data collection was heavily split between Africa Practice and Code for Africa, and so was development.
Mm-hmm.
I have a video that you can check
Mm-hmm.
out. We just did
Sure
like
thing.
a video of that entire process. So
Fantastic.
this is the project that I'll be talking about, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll be focusing on how those three bits that I talked about. Sorry,
Yeah.
it's how those three bits, or rather the process that I talked
Mm-hmm.
about, the key activities that we did in each, and then how
Mm-hmm.
it drove us to the expected outcome.
Great. That,
Yes.
that'll be
So
fantastic.
should I
Yeah.
continue?
Yeah, yeah, please do.
Okay, so if you remember, I'll just go back briefly. We
Okay.
had, in terms of our implementation approach, we have
Mm-hmm.
four key phases: discover,
Mm-hmm.
define, develop, deliver.
And deliver.
So
Mm-hmm.
in the discovery phase,
Mm-hmm.
our primary focus at this point in time is to develop a very clear and nuanced understanding of the problem. And you can only do this by talking to the people that you're designing for. The image that I'm showing on this screen is a photo I took of my colleague.
Mm-hmm.
Mugi is her name, and one of our study participants. We were
Mm-hmm.
in Lagos to do user research. And
Mm-hmm.
when we talk about user research, people usually jump into a certain aspect of it. There
Mm-hmm.
are different ways you can do user research. We
Mm-hmm.
always start with desktop research. There's no
Mm-hmm.
point spending a lot of time and effort out there,
Mm-hmm.
yet it's information that you can find online.
You can find
So we
online.
start
Yeah,
with the
that's true.
desktop research to make sure that
Mm-hmm.
we are not asking questions to our users that we already know answers to.
Mm-hmm.
Once we had that and we had a research plan in place, we now left our comfortable offices and traveled to three different countries. So we went to Senegal, Nigeria, and
Mm-hmm.
Tanzania. In Senegal, we were in Dakar.
Mm-hmm.
In Nigeria,
Yeah.
we did Lagos and Abuja. Then in
Mm-hmm.
Tanzania, we went to Dar es Salaam. The key outputs for this phase and how they
Yeah.
shape like where we're going
Mm-hmm.
forward was a study report. It
Mm-hmm.
highlighted the specific needs, the goals
Mm-hmm.
that our users had in mind, and
Mm-hmm.
then the constraints they faced in that specific environment, and then the opportunities for design. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
part of the reason I picked this as the case study is because one of
Mm-hmm.
our original hypotheses in terms of the goal for the project was sort of
Mm-hmm.
quickly disproved during the research
Mm-hmm.
study. So
Yeah, really
we
interesting to know what that
assumed,
was. Yeah.
sorry, Charity, please go first.
I think I'm so curious to know what that was.
Okay,
Yeah.
we assumed
Mm-hmm.
but we'd already started seeing this in terms of our secondary research, but we
Mm-hmm.
validated it with our now field research. We
Mm-hmm.
assumed that these small and medium-sized NGOs had a bit
Mm-hmm.
of control in terms of how they designed and
Mm-hmm.
executed the projects that they were working on. But we
Mm-hmm.
quickly realized that the way the environment or the sector is structured,
Mm-hmm.
the goals of a program and the program being done are usually defined by donors. So there's a very, very small wiggle room
Mm-hmm.
for these organizations to make any changes further down the line.
Mm-hmm.
So we
Mm-hmm.
pivoted now what we were working on from
Mm-hmm.
that. Remember that broad statement where we were trying
Yeah.
to, let's just
Mm-hmm.
go back to it. Oh, yeah, this one, where we are trying to promote more data driven program design and program implementation in small and medium
Mm-hmm.
sized NGOs. We
Mm-hmm.
shifted to
Mm-hmm.
better supporting
Mm-hmm.
advocacy organizations and media
Mm-hmm.
houses with the right information to tell
Mm-hmm.
stories that have impact. So that could
Mm-hmm.
be in a newsroom, it could be during like a government session where you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to convince like policy stakeholders to go in a certain direction. And
Mm-hmm.
this is essentially the essence of most things that we do. I've
Mm-hmm.
found that if we stick to our pre-assumptions and just say we won't change tact, then
Mm-hmm.
we're actually not using the design process. So a big
True.
part of the design process is
Mm-hmm.
ensuring that you're actually getting feedback and changing your direction or your approach based on that. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that report there really
Mm-hmm.
highlighted all those things and
Mm-hmm.
helped us redefine our problem
Mm-hmm.
and our
Mm-hmm.
customer segment. Yep.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting
So
because I wanted to know if like the objectives you had were much like the people you're designing for, were they fixed kind of from the owners of the project, like, or were they also flexible based on the outcomes that you're recommending to change their direction?
it's actually both because remember, at the end of the day, your client or your
Mm-hmm.
donor has a specific broad
Yeah.
outcome. But
Mm-hmm.
I feel most times you have a bit more wiggle room in terms
Mm-hmm.
of how you execute and the technical implementation.
Mm-hmm.
So as
Mm-hmm.
long as we didn't stray from that goal of providing data-driven program design and execution, we were still like delivering
Mm-hmm.
value in terms of
All right.
the brief that we got. There are
Mm-hmm.
scenarios where there might be a huge disconnect. It's something quite
Mm-hmm.
difficult to deal with because
Mm-hmm.
it usually means like now stopping everything and going back to the drawing board. But
Back
it's
to
better to
drawing.
do that than insist on
Mm-hmm.
going down the wrong path. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
100%. You're completely making sense.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
with the data that you collect from your desktop research and your study, you should be able
Mm-hmm.
to build a case if
Mhm.
there's a disconnect, like when you come back from the field, you've done your synthesis and you've really identified opportunities that you can design for, you should be able
Mhm.
to use the data that you collected
Mhm.
during your desktop research and your field work
Mhm.
to convince the stakeholders
Mhm.
that maybe we were in the wrong direction. Let's focus on this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not
Okay.
something easy to do, but it's a muscle. Like
Yeah.
you sort of get used to it as you do it more.
Yeah, that's true. I think it points goes back to the point that you were saying. Remember, you're not a feature factory, so you're also there to be your client's partner and orienting them in the right direction as needed, as the data is telling
Yes,
you.
Kabisa,
Fantastic.
Kabisa. Very true.
Yeah.
So from this field work, we had a lot of problems that we could solve. So we
Mm-hmm.
then needed to define which area to focus on next.
Mm-hmm.
There is an approach that has been advocated heavily by the team at Google. It's called the design sprint. And
Mm-hmm.
the essence of a design sprint is within 5 days, you want to prototype and test something and validate if you're going in the right direction. So remember from our field work, we had
Mm-hmm.
this large report with key findings and all that, and like quite a lot of information. Most times it's
Mm-hmm.
very, very difficult for implementation teams to take that and start doing something about it. So we needed to
Mm-hmm.
narrow down on a specific area that we wanted to work in. And to do
Mm-hmm.
this, I planned a design sprint workshop. It was a full
Mm-hmm.
week, Monday to Friday, with different
Mm-hmm.
stakeholders. So we had the working team, so that's Africa Practice.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my team, Code for
Mm-hmm.
Africa, we also
Mm-hmm.
had some of the study participants join us. I think we also had like now a couple of players in the data sector or in the data space
Mm-hmm.
and a couple of government actors. It was not a very large group. We are about, I think, 12 to 15 people stuck in a room
Mm-hmm.
for a couple of days. On the first day, we focused a lot on now that we have this very broad understanding of a problem, which area do we
Mm-hmm.
think we should focus on? So that's
Mm-hmm.
actually the definition. Like, let's say we noticed so many issues in the space. Let's
Mm-hmm.
brainstorm and work through what should we
Mm-hmm.
start with? How do you
What
prioritize?
is
Let's dig deep into these problems. Make sure we all have a shared understanding in this room of this problem, and then
Mm-hmm.
now decide on the area that we want to focus on. So at the end
Mm-hmm.
of the day, a clear focus area. We will
Mm-hmm.
choose to specifically solve this challenge. The next
Mm-hmm.
day is now where the brainstorming is. This is the
Yeah.
part that people really like.
Mm-hmm.
We sketched so many competing solutions, and at
Mm-hmm.
this point we are breaking into different working groups and having
Mm-hmm.
sharing sessions where you just talk through what you've worked on, and then
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day we just hang them on the wall and
Mm-hmm.
left for the next day. The next day we came back,
Mm-hmm.
chose. Now we are talking about solutions. Now we've moved away from problems to solutions. we
Mm-hmm.
so we looked at all the solutions that we had. Some of
Mm-hmm.
them were composite solutions, like a solution
Mm-hmm.
that maybe three teams worked on. You ended up
Mm-hmm.
creating a very clear flow of how this thing would work, and then picks like the one that we felt was the most promising. I think
Mm-hmm.
an important distinction to make at this point in time, what you have at the end of Tuesday is
Mm-hmm.
not app app screens, it's just
Mm-hmm.
flows. Like it's how
Mm-hmm.
this thing work from a customer journey mapping perspective,
Mm-hmm.
from a
Mm-hmm.
flow diagram, that type of a thing. So
Yeah.
on Wednesday, the first thing that we did in the morning was to select what we felt was the best hybrid solution. And then now have the teams work on the actual screens. So it
Mm-hmm.
was a web platform. So they were
Mm-hmm.
actually drawing the different screen components quickly. Like you sketch a couple of things, you share, get
Mm-hmm.
feedback, and then maybe throw out a couple of things. And then by the end of the day, what
Mm-hmm.
you have is some really, 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 really well stitched end to end flows
Mm-hmm.
depicting how your product will be without having spent even a minute
Mm-hmm.
on your computer bringing it to life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something
Mm-hmm.
that is quick and cheap to build, but it's very
Yeah.
thorough and detailed. On
Mm-hmm.
Thursday, this is now where the pressure shifts away from the entire team to the
Mm-hmm.
prototyping team. So our
Mm-hmm.
prototyping team was made up of a UI designer, who brought
Okay.
the low fidelity wireframes to life,
Mhm.
and then a
Mhm.
front end engineer, two of them,
Mhm.
who build a realistic prototype without a back
Ah,
end to it.
uh-huh.
So literally taking
It's
the
just like
screens,
shell. Mhm.
yeah, and then now translating them into clickable wireframes that
Mhm.
are like it's not even Goldilocks quality. Goldilocks quality is something that is
Yeah.
passive, good enough for you
Yeah.
to say it was
Mhm.
like actual designs, like pixel
Yeah.
perfect. So
Mhm.
that was the entire day on Thursday.
Mhm.
We had quite a number of feedback sessions where
Mhm.
the team now prototyping would work on it, and then we'd have a session to give feedback. So most of the times I usually need everyone between Monday to Thursday, no, to
Mhm.
Wednesday, and then they can
Mhm.
go and do their other things. So on Thursday, it's mostly
Fantastic.
the prototyping team. At the end of
Mhm.
that day, after several
Mhm.
iterations rather, we had something. So in parallel to the team prototyping
Mhm.
on Thursday, now as the
Mhm.
research lead, I'd already created the personas
Yeah.
of the people that I'm going to like test with. So we were
Mhm.
recruiting already on Thursday. On Friday
Mhm.
morning, the morning session, we had a usability testing session with,
Mhm.
I think it was about 8 participants or 10. We usually,
Mhm.
so for usability studies, the
Mhm.
sampling size is usually 5, but
Mhm.
from experience, you want to recruit more people because you will have no shows. But there are also
Yeah,
times
definitely.
where you will have more people than your
Mhm.
sampling. So spend the morning doing
Mhm.
usability testing,
Mhm.
and then in the afternoon, we consolidated everything, like had
Mhm.
really clear early insights into
Mhm.
what we were working on. We knew what
Mhm.
we needed to change, and we
Mhm.
knew what resonated and what didn't resonate. So
Mhm.
within that like short window, literally
Mhm.
5 days, you've gone through that process of
Mhm.
defining exactly what you will build,
Mhm.
and what you have doesn't live on a Word document. I usually
Yeah.
discourage people from
Mhm.
defining things using a narrative style like a Word document. You'd rather
Mhm.
have customer journey maps, low
Mhm.
fidelity prototypes,
Mhm.
or high fidelity prototypes, because those
Mhm.
ones communicate it better and
Mhm.
allows you to quickly move on to the next step. This
Mhm.
is a photo from one of the sessions where we were sketching.
Nice. Mhm.
I think I have another one from. This
Yeah.
is how
Yeah.
the, the the sketching looks like. It's not perfect.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's just throwing things in here and making
This
sure
is the
that
one
you.
from day two.
Yes, no, this is not
Yeah.
from day 2. This is
Mhm.
day 3.
Mhm. Day three.
Remember,
Yeah.
day 2,
Mhm.
it's journey maps. It's not.
Mhm.
It's flows.
Ah.
It's how things will go.
Yeah.
Day
Okay.
3 is now the specifics of like the different screens
Yeah.
and the content on the different screens.
Okay.
Uh, this is during the testing,
Mhm.
where we are now actually presenting our
Mhm.
prototype to our end user. We usually
Mhm.
have a couple of people who will observe,
Mhm.
make sure
Mhm.
that your tester is comfortable
Mhm.
and that they don't feel overwhelmed by the entire experience. And if
Yeah.
necessary, you can just have it to be you and a note taker. Yeah, but that's an entire
Mhm.
conversation by itself. Yeah,
True,
so
because sometimes I think they change their behavior and how they click things because of just the spectator. I like to say like spectator effect, like
yes,
how you
yes,
want
yes.
to do things differently to please whoever is watching. Um,
So
yeah.
I did a screenshot of another
Mm-hmm.
prototype. This is not from this specific project. We
Okay.
also had an opportunity to do an iTax component. iTax is
Mm-hmm.
Kenya's online file taxing platform. We did a
Mm-hmm.
similar design sprint to like work on an improved version of an of iTax just based on
Mm-hmm.
another project. But this is
Mm-hmm.
the what I mean by high fidelity.
Yeah.
The outcome
So
actually looks like this.
close
So this
to
is the designer's screen,
yeah.
and then they'll now share it with the front end engineer who will
Mm-hmm.
use preferably a JavaScript based platform
Mm-hmm.
to do it. But now in this age, you
Mm-hmm.
can take this, throw it on an AI, it will give you the HTML, and then you do the
Mm-hmm.
stitching to make it happen. So prototyping
Mm-hmm.
is a bit faster now. Yeah, but I
Mm-hmm.
just wanted to make sure that I'm communicating
Great.
when we talk about prototypes, especially for our markets, African markets,
Mhm.
low
Mhm.
fidelity doesn't work. It has to be something very, very realistic, something
Yeah.
polished, something
Mhm.
someone thinks it actually works. You won't have the
Mhm.
back end though. So when someone is logging in, we are not checking
Yeah.
it. When someone
Mhm.
fills a form, we are just simulating the flow
Mhm.
so that you get reactions and
Yeah.
feedback and
Purely like
post
for
to
validation.
something.
Yeah.
Yes,
And understanding and then just getting that fast opinion of what they think. Are they able to do this? Yeah.
yes,
Right.
exactly. So the outcome from the defined stage, and I think I haven't like listed
Mm-hmm.
everything. So from
Mm-hmm.
those high fidelity designs that we got, the
Yeah.
next step is now to prepare for the development phase, where in this phase we're just executing or we're building the software. So what I
Mm-hmm.
usually do at the end of now the testing period is
Mm-hmm.
take all those screens and all that information and turn it
Mm-hmm.
into user stories. I don't,
Mm-hmm.
should I explain the user story component, or Charity? Let you explain what user stories are.
Essentially, because you want to start developing your actual features, it's like translating this into the scenario that your customer would be using those features. So it's like, as a X person, I want to be able to do ABC. So,
Yes.
and then that's what you'll use to drive the delivery of that thing.
Yes, and I think
Mm-hmm.
for most people they usually find it cumbersome or
Mm-hmm.
tedious, but I feel
Yeah.
it's a very, very important step in the process because
Yeah.
it drives a lot of clarity. Because now
Mm-hmm.
from the user stories, it's very easy for me to now create a backlog of features.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the
Mm-hmm.
epics. So personally,
Yeah.
I usually just do epics and features, and then the
Mm-hmm.
development team will do the specific tasks. Yeah, so
Mm-hmm.
the handover from the defined stage is high
Mm-hmm.
fidelity mockups, or rather
Mm-hmm.
a prototype in this specific scenario, user
Mm-hmm.
stories, and then a board, an, an
Mm-hmm.
agile board with epics and features.
About.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now we get into now the traditional software development phase where we
Mm-hmm.
all like we are quite familiar with it. So this
Mm-hmm.
is the agile software development 2 week sprints
Mm-hmm.
with a demo at
Mm-hmm.
the end, and
Yeah.
then continuous testing and quality assurance. We do demos every 2 weeks. Closer to
Mm-hmm.
the launch date, we usually do demos more.
Mm-hmm.
And then a bit later in the process, we do a bit of
Mm-hmm.
usability testing. I don't think I
Mm-hmm.
have photos of this for this specific project, though. Yeah, but I have a
Okay.
feeling a
Yeah.
lot of people are familiar with this phase, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
knowledge out there on how to develop really, really well.
Mm-hmm. That's true. And now, when you say like the demos and you're having them every week, it's essentially internal, right?
Not every week,
Mm-hmm.
2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks.
Yeah, but the cadence varies based
Mm-hmm.
on the project that you're working on.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
the work that I did for the Africa Climate Summit, the mobile
Mm-hmm.
application, and the two other projects, we only had a
Mm-hmm.
6 week window to
Mm-hmm.
execute this part. So we ended up doing weekly demos, and
Mm-hmm.
we had daily virtual stand-ups
Mm-hmm.
and bot to get people to like respond to the needs. So I feel, especially in the development phase, what I
Yeah.
encourage most people to do is figure out an agile software development process. That's
Mm-hmm.
the ceremonies that you will do, the frequency, how you will run them, and the
Mm-hmm.
tools that work for your specific organization and the product
Mm-hmm.
that you're building. So there are
Yes, now.
scenarios I'll maybe do 2 week sprints. There are
Mm-hmm.
scenarios I'll do 1 week sprint, and there are even
Mm-hmm.
scenarios I'll not use agile software development at all.
Mm-hmm.
As an example, the team at Basecamp has this 6 week
Mm-hmm.
like approach. So instead of doing 2 week sprints, you do 6 week sprints. Yeah. So just being
Mm-hmm.
flexible enough and curious enough
Yeah.
to look at the project that you're working on and
Mm-hmm.
sort of figure out what is the best way to execute that project.
Yeah. So it's very, very
Yes.
contextual based on what you're working on.
Yes. Yes. The last part, if I can jump to it, is delivery.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think we usually pay a bit of lip service to this.
Mm-hmm.
So the first bit, of course, is you have to deploy it for people to access it.
Mm-hmm.
Technical documentation, we all understand the value of that.
Yeah.
training and user manual development. Most
Mhm.
times, to be honest, in my experience so far,
Mhm.
we rarely really do training or user manual development, but we
Mhm.
have a body of knowledge that anybody can
Mhm.
refer to in case they
Mhm.
need something specific. And the thinking
Mhm.
behind it is we've gotten to a point where, one,
Mhm.
a lot of people are actually comfortable with tech products. So you
Mhm.
don't need to do a training unless your product is very different. And then
Yeah.
two, uh, we really, really strive to create intuitive user experiences so that we
Mhm.
don't have
Mhm.
to teach people how to use it. Yeah, so
Yeah.
the first three are fairly straightforward for most people, but
Yeah.
product analytics setup, I think that's something that most of us overlook. Uh,
Mhm.
if you're launching a product or a new feature, you want to really know how people are using it. And the
Yeah.
best way to
Mhm.
go about it is by setting up analytics.
Mhm.
For you can use a product like Google Analytics, you can use something like
Mhm.
Mixpanel, but essentially what
Mhm.
you want to do is collect data and present it in a way that gives you a story of how everything is
Mhm.
going.
Mhm.
When you launch something for the first time, it's always a pilot. You need to pay a lot
Yeah.
of attention to it. And pilot support could be along the way you've discovered a critical bug. You need to fix it
Yeah.
quick. Or maybe
Mhm.
from your product analytics, you realize
Mhm.
people are dropping off at the end of registration. Or maybe people
Mm.
are not completing checkout. So being
Mhm.
there, like being able to turn around quickly and fix it. And
Mm.
then, of course, now continuous improvement goes in hand with pilot support. Continuous improvement is making the changes that you need to do now, but
Mhm.
also tweaking your longer term strategy to factor
Yeah.
in learnings as you run the pilot. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
delivery component of this. I have a
Mhm.
longer checklist for this because now
Mhm.
there are things like security. Security is a big factor.
Mhm. Mhm.
There are things like data, not data requirements. If you're
Mhm.
collecting user information, you need to go through that process of making
Mhm.
sure that you're following the how you
Mhm.
handle personally identifiable information. Yeah, but
Mm.
delivery is the easier part. I feel most people usually struggle with discovery. You
Mhm.
jump into a
Mhm.
project and execute it without really exploring the problem
That's true.
deeply,
Yeah.
defining it well and handing it over in such a way that development teams can now go through the flow of
Mhm.
building what you worked on. Pilot for the
Mhm.
delivery, it's just the last three: analytics setup, how you support the
Mhm.
pilot, and how you feed in the new knowledge to
Mhm.
continuously improve in the short term and
Exactly.
really
Yeah.
use real feedback to
To
tweak the
improve.
strategy where
Yeah.
necessary. Yes.
Right. Yeah. I think this is a really like great approach. I would love to see like the full checklist. Maybe we can share like a template of that with whoever's watching. Um, Definitely. And I agree with you on the part on ambiguity. I think also on projects I've been on in the past earlier in my career, just dealing with all that. You have all this data, all this, customer needs, clients are saying this, but you have synthesizing all that into a
Mhm.
coherent and specific direction for you to now start the your workflow on. I think that's definitely something that you get better with time, and it needs more effort than this
Yes,
other
and
the end part.
intentionality. I don't think we
Yeah,
can just say you get better with time. You just need to
yeah,
be very intentional about it.
intentional,
And
exactly.
yeah, one thing I always mention,
Hmm.
especially when people talk about research and how confusing it is, how should you sample?
Hmm.
It's more to do with
Yeah,
the more you invest in learning your craft, the better you become at it. And even for
true.
someone who's not like maybe an expert in research, it's
Mm.
very important you know the research process, the value of research, and so on and so forth. The same way as a
Hmm.
product manager or as a researcher,
Hmm.
I really need to understand how tech products are built. And if it means
Yeah.
and I'm able to, going into the technical details, not being a developer, but just
Mm.
knowing how does this space work.
How does
It's,
it
it's
work?
very,
Yeah,
very important. Yeah. I
great.
just wanted
That's
to give a snapshot of Taimu itself.
Mhm.
It's really, really evolved
Yeah.
since we worked on it.
Wow. Hmm.
And it's evolved based on like real user feedback. The team at
Hmm.
Africa Practice is still running this, and they
Hmm.
have a lot of information, especially around the policy space,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
like a way to really explore this data, these visuals, download them,
Mm-hmm.
share them where you need to. And they've
Mm-hmm.
even gotten to a point where you get a couple of things when you're not registered, and if you
Mm-hmm.
want more, you have to register. Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's such a fantastic project. It's not an easy
Mm-hmm.
project to execute, especially
Definitely, I can
because of
imagine.
the landscape. Yeah, but all in
Mm-hmm.
all, I feel it was such a fantastic experience, and
Yeah.
it's a very good case study for someone
Mm-hmm.
looking to understand the broad landscape of product
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
development because it touches quite a bit of it. I did not talk a lot about stakeholder engagement or management because
Mm-hmm.
that's an entire topic by itself, especially if you
Yeah.
have a consortium of people working on something that is
Mm-hmm.
targeting a very dynamic group of people and
Mm-hmm.
a space that needs like a lot more effort. Yeah.
True. Maybe in the future we can have another chat just to talk about stakeholder engagement and, you know, yeah. So
Okay.
I'm curious to know if you were to approach this project today, since this was, I think, 5 years ago, right?
Mm.
If you were to do this today from scratch, what would you change or what would you do different?
Okay. Interestingly, what I would do differently is less on the end user part and more around how we organized ourselves as the execution team. I feel a
Mm-hmm.
lot of knowledge or insights fell between the cracks in terms of how we are, for example, translating our findings from research and
Mm-hmm.
maybe reconciling it with like what data is available
Yeah.
out there because we are talking about open data in a way. Yeah. So just the
Mm-hmm.
personal relationships and how we interacted and worked together towards the end goal. In
Mm-hmm.
terms of the shipping window, we did a pretty good job, so I would not change
Mm-hmm.
that. And I'll just tighten the ship in terms of how we worked together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. I think that's definitely a good approach. It's always important to, as you continue to grow, look back and try to think, what could I have done different just to, you know,
Yes, I agree.
achieve a better outcome or yeah, in some way. And what, and I think this is now a general question, just out of like the project context and kind of
Mm.
taking you back to the journey, your journey to product management that you explained earlier on. What advice would you have to people that are trying to kind of segue into product management? And before that, actually, there's usually a debate that's going on online
Mm.
on, do we think that designers or people that have been designers or engineers make better product managers as opposed to people that went direct into the path? So I'd like to know like your thoughts on that and like any advice that you might have as well.
Okay, so on my side, I tend to think that product management is a generalist role. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
there's that argument that someone who used to be a designer will make a better product
Mm-hmm.
manager, or that argument that maybe if you have
Yeah.
a engineering background, you'll be a better designer is valid.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
most of your work involves working with other people. So, of
True.
course, you have to have quite a bit on your side. And the way I usually look at it is if you were to draw that Venn diagram that I showed earlier,
Yeah.
we had the technology component.
Mm-hmm.
So the technology component essentially favors people who have a tech background. If you're an
Yeah.
engineer, you really
Mm-hmm.
have a deep understanding of technology. Then there's
Mm-hmm.
the market component.
Mm-hmm.
This really favors designers.
Mm-hmm.
Designers, I would say, yeah, mostly designers. People who spend a lot of time out in the field interacting with
Mm-hmm.
potential
With
users
customers.
and so on and so forth. And then the last part is the business component.
Mm-hmm.
So someone who understands P&L, monetization strategies, all that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very, very difficult to find someone with all the three skills.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel when we talk about now how you get into that space,
Mm-hmm.
I've always advised people to be strong in two of those. So as an example, okay, my
Mm-hmm.
example is a bit different because I did the three different things at any stage in my career.
Yeah.
But if you
Mm-hmm.
maybe you can, if you don't have a tech background,
Mm-hmm.
really learn like the market component, trends, how people perceive things, the value of research, and so on and so forth, and
Mm-hmm.
also have a very good understanding of like businesses and how businesses make money. And then it could
Mm-hmm.
also be a combination of you have the technology savviness and maybe business components, or you have technology and market.
Mm-hmm.
But even without those, okay, without at least one, you're going to struggle.
Mm-hmm.
I feel if you're very, very intentional about learning and
Mm-hmm.
growing and getting better at that space, aka honing your craft, your
Mm-hmm.
background doesn't really matter. I've seen really, really good product managers who came from a design
Mm-hmm.
background. I've seen
Mm-hmm.
really good product managers who were lawyers before they got into tech. So it's just
Mm-hmm.
it's your interest and your will and your
Mm-hmm.
ability to push
And your
yourself to
drive.
really get
Mm-hmm.
better at what you do. Is those in the other parts, I would not really focus on
Yeah.
that much. Yeah, it becomes
Yeah.
a discussion that has no end. It's similar to
Mm-hmm.
the stack conversation. Which stack is better?
Mm-hmm.
In the sense that if you're joining a highly technical company,
Yeah.
if you don't have a technical background, you will struggle. Like if
Mm-hmm.
you're going to work in a team that works on AI and you've never
Yeah.
touched tech, you will really, really struggle. So
That's
it's
true.
not that straightforward. But
Mm-hmm.
my parting, I know I've rambled a bit on this section,
No
is
problem.
if you
No
have the
problem.
aptitude, the interest, and you
Yeah.
focus on the right organization or opportunities,
Mm-hmm.
it's very easy over time for you to grow and be a very good product manager.
True. So basically, the bottom line is just keep learning, keep exploring, and when it gets the time to get the job done, just ensure you're getting the job, done.
Yes. Yep.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your project and your insights on like product management. Sorry, as a whole. I know that's another debate, project and product. Um, yeah, thank you. I personally have learned a lot as a product designer. That also doubles on my agency in product management. Sometimes I think this has been very insightful for me, and yeah, I appreciate the time that you've taken to hop on a call with me.
You're welcome, and thanks for having me.